Greetings folks and welcome to the Electromaker Show. This is your midweek roundup of all things maker and embedded and both and lovely. We have a packed show of products and funding website things and some projects you might want to try yourself, as well as of course the mystery box competition where you can win something by doing almost nothing whatsoever. But for now, let's get on with the show. And to start the show this week, we're going to look at a few products and a few updates that have come out in the last week, some of which are very exciting, but we'll be beginning with a new book that the Raspberry Pi Press have put out. And that book is called Create Graphical User Interfaces with Python. Now, as you might expect from a book from the Raspberry Pi Press, this is going to be quite a well put together and easy to follow book. And that's a good thing, because anyone who's tried to create a user interface, be it in Python or any other language, will know that it can be a bit of a nightmare. There are some great libraries out there for creating user interfaces in Python. I'm quite a fan of PySimple GUI because it is very simple and I don't tend to need anything too fancy. But this uses the GUI 0 library, which is one that I wasn't familiar with until finding this, and it does look quite cool. Now, I'm assuming that GUI 0 is supposed to be reminiscent of GPIO 0, the library which is now adopted as sort of the official library for working with GPIO pins on the Raspberry Pi. And with good reason. While I learned using RPI.GPIO, that library was every tutorial had, and still to this day many still do use that library. GPIO 0 does have some very nice quality of life features, that's the phrase I'm looking for. And I'm assuming GUI 0 will not be particularly different in that I'm assuming they've taken a library that already does what it needs to do and have made it somewhat simpler by working with it and putting something on top of it. Works with the standard Python take into GUI library, no need to install those libraries. Yeah, there we go. Abstracts away details new learners find difficult to understand. This is exactly what GPIO 0 does as well. It abstracts away some stuff that maybe beginners don't need to know. It's still there. You can still access it if you need it using the library that is underneath the GUI 0 or GPIO 0 library. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. This is a book that you can buy now. It is now available from the RPI Press. And it looks like it's a fairly chunky book. It's 156 pages, all full color, all easy to follow. Anyone who has bought a book from the Raspberry Pi Press before will know that they are generally of a very high quality. I can speak to this because I don't have it in my hand. It's in a box in the basement. I have this book, which is an introduction to C and GUI programming. Again, it's the same length. It is very easy to follow. And I'm a big advocate of learning using books. As I showed you some time ago, I have over there a couple of books that I very rarely get the chance to dip into with the time I have, but they're to do with working with STM32 architecture. And as much as the internet is full of every kind of tutorial that you might need, and certainly I have become very used to using video tutorials over the years. I've learned a lot of things from videos. There is still a lot to be said for having a print version of something that you can have next to you, albeit with a laptop or a Raspberry Pi in front of you to actually work from, but to work at that pace instead of constantly having to switch windows to read something or have it on a second monitor, so constantly staying from monitor to monitor, or as with a video, obviously, you'll be playing it, pausing it, trying something out, trying to find code in the description. No, one book, everything there. And if it's a well-written book, like everything from the RPI Press, then yeah, I would absolutely say Christmas is coming. You know someone who wants it, or maybe you are kind of going to be asked, hey, what do you want for Christmas? And if you're like me, you're like, nothing, this peace. Yeah, this is a perfect Christmas present for you or someone else, and I'm pretty hyped to read this one myself. I might ask for this for Christmas, actually, but don't tell anyone. Anyway, I think I will just leave a link to the Raspberry Pi blog post in the description, because from there you can easily find the shop page for it. And there's a few other bits of information here, like a link to the GUI 0 library, as I showed you. And of course, there's nothing to stop you just grabbing the library and having a go. You can do that as well. But this book seems like a very nice way to get into it, and also one that I suspect you could probably, with help, work through with older kids and get them interested in GUIs. I mean, GUIs are the way in with programming. Scratch is essentially a GUI. Yeah, why not? So staying with the Raspberry Pi, but moving on, Ubuntu is now available officially on the Raspberry Pi. There is a little bit of a catch, however. So there's been ways to stick Ubuntu on a Raspberry Pi for a very long time. But in terms of official images, there wasn't really a desktop version, and now there is. However, it is just the 64-bit version for the Raspberry Pi 4. Now, of course, there are the other versions still available of Ubuntu Server, including the long-term support version and a newer updated 2010 or 20.10 version of Ubuntu Server. But yes, if you have a Raspberry Pi 4 and presumably one with a fair chunk of RAM in it, I think the minimum requirements are 4 gigs of RAM. So the explanation for why it's on Pi 4 is all here. Essentially, just it's bigger, it's chunkier, it requires more computer to run Ubuntu, and I can speak to that. I mean, I even have some older laptops that I use as Linux machines that I like to cycle between different Linux distros, and whenever I've purchased regular Ubuntu on there, they chug a bit. So yes, here we are. Because of its size, it only works on Raspberry Pi's models with 4 or 8 gigabytes of RAM, whereas Server is much smaller, which is why you can stick it on almost any Raspberry Pi. However, official support for Ubuntu is something that I know will make a lot of people happy. Ubuntu is a lot of people's daily drivers who use Linux as their day-to-day thing. Not gonna lie, it might be my daily driver if I was not stuck in a position where I sort of have to use Windows alongside Linux. Because of my work, Windows just is convenient. But yeah, if I was completely left alone and I was just able to choose what I did just out of what I like, I'm kind of into Ubuntu these days. Used to always be Linux Mint, now Ubuntu. Anyway, you can put it on a Raspberry Pi. If you have a Raspberry Pi 4 and you do decide to put the desktop version of Ubuntu on it, let me know how it goes. My Pi 4 is currently tied up in a secret project, so I can't really test it myself right now. Let me know in the comments if you try this yourself and if it works well. Sticking with the Raspberry Pi, and last week we talked about the new compute module that has been released, and we've talked about Jeff Geerling on the show before as well. Now, his YouTube channel is a treasure trove for all things to do with Pi. He has a fantastic series on the Turing Pi cluster that he created using Raspberry Pi 3 compute modules, and now the Pi 4 compute module is out. Now, I did talk about it on the show last week, but I did not go into very much detail, for good reason. We're on a sharp time schedule for this show to get it out and for the show to not be about an hour and a half long. Jeff Geerling is an absolute authority on this stuff, and if you would like to know everything you would possibly need to know about the Pi 4 compute module, then this is the channel for you to subscribe to. And this specific video is the review of the compute module, and as is with everything else that he does on his channel, it is very, very in-depth, and the 21 minutes are not wasted at all. There is a lot of information in here. So as always, I am not going to go through even a scrap of the stuff that he will be covering. I'm just going to say this is definitely one of the videos that if you're interested in the compute module and are wondering maybe why it exists, wondering maybe why would you get one of those instead of a Raspberry Pi 4, go and watch this video. It will answer every single one of your questions. And yeah, Jeff Geerling, one of my real go-to channels for anything Pi at the minute. The guy's cool. The guy's really good. And now moving on to Sparkfun, which is a company we haven't really covered on this show before. However, they put something out, or are in the process of putting something out, which is really quite cool and could be a little bit game-changing for some people. And that is the Sparkfun MicroMod system. And in a video hosted by the inimitable Rob Reynolds, who is a fantastic YouTube presenter, I have been a fan of his work for some time. It's amazing how much personality some people can put into simply just introducing a product. Anyway, as always, I don't want to dredge through every single thing that MicroMod can do, so let me just explain it to you as quickly and as simply as possible. So, whether you're talking about a Raspberry Pi or a Google Coral Dev board or one of these little Arduinos, what you're essentially talking about is a development board which has a chip that is either soldered to it, or in the case of the Arduino, it just fits directly onto it. Now, you can take this chip off. In the case of the Arduino, you can replace it with another identical chip. However, as far as I know, there is no other chip that would fit onto the Arduino development board and work without issue. Now, this is of course a little bit different in the case of the Google Coral Dev board that we talked about last week, and the NVIDIA Jetson Nano, for example. They have system on modules that can slide into and work with those development baseboards. But again, as far as I know, there is no cross-compatibility. There might be some in the NVIDIA ecosystem between the Jetson Nano and the Xavier NX. I don't actually know. That's something I should look up. But in essence, you have a development board that has some in, out, and some ports and some ways of powering a chip, and you have the chip that fits onto it. Now, what you're seeing here is a Cortex M4F chip with Bluetooth Low Energy built into it. Now, it's just the chip and the very bare essentials it needs to run the chip on an edge connector. And a few of you have probably already worked out why this is cool. And that is because once you have an edge connector board like this, you have a sort of system on module framework. This one with an ESP32, and again, with these edge connectors that can fit into a baseboard. And here is an example of a baseboard with a lot of I/O. There are various things that you can do with this, but the main thing you are seeing in the middle here is that area where those little system on module chips can fit. So far you have the option of using multiple different system on modules with a baseboard, but it goes a little bit further than that as well. Because it goes beyond just basic baseboards. This is one with a TFT display and some LEDs. I believe there is yet another one which is perhaps a simpler version. Yeah, okay, this is the Sparkfun machine learning one, which has a micro SD port. But you can see, again, this is where you would fit the brains of the operation. And I'm assuming that this is the start of this ecosystem. I'm assuming they're going to come out with more and more things that fit this. It's exciting. It's a very nice way of doing things, and the idea of being able to just pluck out an ESP32 from your baseboard and replace it with an STM32 or any other kind of module that they decide to create is kind of exciting. And this is Sparkfun. They're going to have some really good examples of how to use this. That's one of the things about them that they've been fantastic about over the years, is that pretty much everything they put out is documented well and pretty easy to use. One thing I'm sure some people will appreciate is the MicroMod carrier kit. This is a DIY kit that will allow you to create your own baseboards for the MicroMod system, which they are calling carrier boards, but I'm just going to use carrier boards and baseboards interchangeably, probably for the whole time I ever talk about this. But that is a nice thing, because it does mean that essentially you can do exactly what they are doing, but say have some very large board which has every kind of input and output that you might want to fiddle with. It seems to me almost a little bit reminiscent of the boards that I've just been looking at recently, the Cypress boards, which are much larger and have a lot of things on the board already, but they all use the same PSOC6 chip. Of course, that is attached to those boards. This could allow you to make some huge, monstrous development board that has everything you could ever need on it, and then swap out the processor on the fly. It's a very nice concept, and I'm very glad that they're doing it. If you are interested in learning a bit more about it, I will put a link to the Sparkfun video in the description of this video. And just to remind you, if you do want to support the show and Electromaker as a whole, we now do have a store, and we do stock Sparkfun goods. So if you are interested in getting one of the MicroMod kits, maybe consider getting it from the Electromaker store. We stock a lot of Sparkfun stuff. I'm not sure if we have the MicroMod stuff in quite yet. The store is something that, of course, I'm very happy about because it supports the show, but I'm not actually directly involved in it. But yes, if you support the store, you're supporting the show, and of course that makes me very happy. Anyway, promotion aside, I suggest going and have a look at the MicroMod ecosystem video where Rob Reynolds explains it in great detail. As with all Sparkfun videos, they're just actually a joy to watch. You could make a product introduction so boring, and in fact there are many large companies, I will name absolutely no one, who do put out incredibly boring introduction videos to their new products. Sparkfun are just a joy. I'm very glad that they are doing this, and this is a very well thought out thing. I will hopefully get my hands on some MicroMod stuff in the near future, so we can have a fiddle with it and see just how open it is and how easy it is to swap things out, because on the surface this is so exciting. And now we move on to Arduino and the Arduino IoT Kit, which is an IoT kit designed for beginners to get into the Internet of Things. So the kit is hardware, but it's very much designed to be an easy to follow thing with lots of tutorials designed especially for it. As it says here, you have 8 out-of-the-box projects to connect up your home and workplace, including your kind of bread and butter smart home projects like remote controlling lights, a weather station which will use the onboard humidity and temperature sensor, which it has, along with various other things. Now, the brains of the operation is the Arduino MKR Wi-Fi 1010 board, which is the one that was released as one of the 4 boards that they kind of released all at the same time, with the Bluetooth Low Energy one and all that kind of stuff. A board that I've never had my hands on at this stage. For me, it's kind of weird. Arduino boards, I really love what they are doing, but now that there are so many options out there, I've had low-powered Wi-Fi and Bluetooth Low Energy development boards that I bought for $2 or $3 that are just made by whoever because of the absolute proliferation of clone boards. Never actually played with one, and I should probably grab a hold of one to try, because these are actually really nicely compact designed boards, and definitely worth the price that they're asking for them. Anyway, I'm getting slightly off topic here. The MKR is definitely the brains, but you can see that there are a lot of other things that they have attached here, and they are really embracing the fact that there are various different ways to attach sensors to things. Grove connectors are absolutely taking off, which is fantastic, because Grove connected sensors and devices are a way for people to learn without breadboarding and without soldering. And yes, I'm aware of the fact that I've said people should breadboard and solder, but if you're just wanting to teach people the software side of the Internet of Things, or just get people excited about it, I completely understand why you would want to just click something in and say, hey, look, it's reading the temperature. I get that. Grove connectors are probably the best way you can do that. And there's connectors for relays and of course a battery clip so that you can just leave this anywhere, and an SD card slot. But that's just on the one side. On the other side, there are capacitive touch buttons and an LCD display, along with the temperature, humidity, pressure, and light slash gesture sensors. So as well as the blog post, Arduino put out an announcement video which highlights how this works very, very nicely and shows you all of the things that come with the kit. And it also shows you the fact that they have a very, very robust getting started guide for beginners. Now, this being Arduino, of course, that they'll be wanting you to use the cloud-based code and IoT editor that they have, which is certainly robust and certainly worth using. And I believe that they give you a free trial of the online version of the... Here we go, yes, it comes with a 12-month subscription to the Arduino Create Maker plan, offering unlimited compilation time and access to all of the features of the Arduino IoT Cloud. But of course, this is an Arduino-based kit, so you don't have to use their cloud-based systems. You don't even have to use the Arduino IDE if you don't want to. The newer Arduinos work just as well with things like Platform IO and VS Code as anything else. But once again, this is the second thing on this show that I kind of feel like if you are looking for a good Christmas gift for someone who wants to mess around and get used to the Internet of Things, or just is a maker who probably wouldn't have had one yet, this might be a good one to get for them. The full kit comes in at 99 euros. I'm not sure what that is in freedom currency or the good old British pound, but you can see that you do get a fair few things with it. What you were really paying for here is this custom PCB with the LCD screen and the various capacitive touch sensors in it. This is a nice little device. I can see myself being very happy with this if I had that as a sort of springboard for learning, because as with all things Arduino, once you've finished your first tutorial, what you can do is get in there and mess with the code and make it do different things. And rather than it just give you a readout of the temperature in the room, maybe you could hook it up to a speaker that screams when the temperature in the room hits a threshold that you're not comfortable with. Don't want to put any ideas in anyone's head, of course. As always, I've barely scratched the surface of what Arduino is saying about this, but it is a new IoT kit for beginners. There's not much more you need to know from my end other than that. I'll leave a link to the Arduino blog in the description because it is worth reading through, but this is not all that different to various other IoT-based kits that people have put out, but this is Arduino, so you know the support is going to be good. You know a lot of people are going to be using this, and you know that, yeah, it's going to be perfect for learners, because let's face it, Arduino are the absolute parents of the learning online with microcontrollers sort of thing. That sentence was going so well. You know, the irony of it is I have a script and it's right there, and I look at it maybe once every 10 minutes. I don't know what's wrong with me. I could make my life so much easier. And finally, this week, I want to very lightly skip over some news that's come out of China about some new chips that are designed to go up against the ESP8266, both in terms of availability and cost. Now, usually I wouldn't cover something this direct on the show, as I don't think there are that many people outside of the industry directly who will be paying too much attention to this at this point. But the BL602/BL604 is a RISC-V, although some people have told me I should be saying RISC-V, and I shouldn't. It is a RISC-V Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 5.0 low energy system on chip. And the idea is it's supposed to sell at the ESP8266 price point, as this fantastic article on CNX Software says. Now, at the time of writing, it does not quite sell for that cheap. They are wanting to get it down to that price, as far as I know. There is, their official website will give you more information on that. You will need to employ a little bit of the Google Translate, but I found that most of the things that I needed to find were in the translation to begin with. Rather than go through everything piece by piece, let's just say this will be a fantastic threat, let's call it, to the ESP8266. And people are very happy about RISC-V being a completely open source instruction set. That is, you know, a very nice thing. Again, I've talked on the show about why that might be useful. But let's just move on to the bit where it maybe starts applying to us. And that comes in the form of a $5 development board using the new chip. And there is a software development kit that comes alongside it. And yeah, so $5 isn't quite down to those low prices of the Node MCU and various other boards with the ESP8266 chip on it that you can get on every website in the world. But it's getting down there, and it's nice to have an alternative at a low price point for things that do Bluetooth Low Energy and Wi-Fi. And there is an image of the development board right here, which isn't necessarily particularly exciting because it looks like almost every other development board out there. But yes, this is what you'll be getting if you're interested in the new chip. And as it mentions right above it, we're not quite down to ESP8266 levels of cost yet, but it is still something that will be interesting for people to try. Now, at the time of writing, they are talking about giving it platform I/O integration to allow you to program it using Visual Studio Code, although I believe that right now yes, here we go. The SDK works on both Windows and Linux and relies on either Eclipse or OpenOCD. Eclipse and OpenOCD, or Freedom Studio and OpenOCD. I imagine a lot of people who have messed with development boards before will already be familiar with Eclipse and OpenOCD, but it will be nice if they get it working with Platform I/O. And if they get it working with the Arduino IDE, then this is going to take off. It's going to be big. People are going to be getting these instead of ESP8266s, just because why not? Not that there's anything wrong with ESP8266, and there's no reason to use this over it. It's just it's the new thing, and people are going to want in and to want to have a go and play with it. At $5 already, it's cheap enough for me to have just said, fine, I'm going to get one, because I want to play with it and I want to see what it's like. And of course, then you get to brag to your friends and say, oh, do you know what, I use an open source instruction set. Yeah, RISC-V. Oh yeah, no, I'm very open source. I'm completely open source, me, yes. Anywho, I will leave a link to this article in the description, and as always, this being CNX software, they go into it in a lot more detail than I would. This is a fantastic website. I advise you to go and take a look. And finally, before moving on, I just wanted to point you in the direction of the NVIDIA Jetson Nano 2GB Developer Kit review that my colleague Mo Long put out actually a little while ago. I may have even mentioned this on the show before, but I'm writing about the Jetson Nano 2GB Developer Kit for something completely separate, and I went back to this and discovered it to be a very, very in-depth review of the new development board from NVIDIA. So as always, if you are interested in this board and are wondering whether you should get one or not, I think this is a fantastic review, and I will leave a link to it in the description. Folks, it is time once again for our mystery box competition, and you know how this goes. I put my hand in this box, I pull out a prize, and we give that prize to someone. So this week we have... Wait, is this just straight up an Intel Edison? This is an Intel Edison box. For those of you that aren't familiar, Intel Edison is sort of the Intel SBC. I don't know if this is actually just a straight up... Oh yeah, okay, this is straight up an Intel Edison. Whoops, there goes a USB cable. Now this is, in case you're not familiar, Intel's SBC. It is based on the Intel Edison module you can see down in the corner here. That is a dual atom chip, I think, maybe? Atom Silvermont, I remember that much. This is the Arduino variant of the board, and as you can see here, you have Arduino Shield compatible pins, and it has various other peripherals like micro SD card and a USB port and a couple of micro USB ports. And I don't know if this operates massively different to the little Edison SBC you used to be able to get. That's the only one I've actually played with. I've never messed around with one of these. Anyway, Intel Edison is the prize, but who is the prize winner? Let's find out. And the winner of this week's mystery box competition is Asger Vestbjerg, I hope I pronounced that name correctly, who won this competition simply by leaving a comment on last week's video. So if you leave a comment on this week's video, maybe you win the competition next week. That is how this competition works. And here I am, back in shot, by the way. I realized maybe when I was up here like this, you might have just seen this. Yeah, okay. That is it. That is our mystery box competition for this week. Let's get on with the rest of the show. And now for a very brief edition of Funding Website Things. And we are going to start with the Microchip Simple VGA console. Now we did talk about this on the show before. I believe it may have been before they actually launched. And this is a portable DIY open hardware retro gaming console, as they say. Now, we covered this originally at a time when we were actually going through several different retro gaming handheld or various different consoles, and they all are good for their various reasons, but I think maybe because I was covering so much of them at the time, I didn't really give this one the justice it deserves. So let's briefly go over again what I talked about last time, which is the fact that it's a DIY soldering kit, and you know how I feel about that. Buy a little useful kit and solder it. That's how you learn to solder. No amount of tutorials or books will help you. Just get an iron in your hand and do it. It is a DIY soldering kit. It is a retro gaming console and also an educational platform and a development framework. We covered all that before. We covered the fact that this is, you know, a little board that you can populate with all of your own parts, including the SAMD microcontroller, and then you can use it using their game map editor. It's a very robust idea, but the thing that I really didn't cover last time we talked about this is the fact that they're doing all of this on chip. So let me try and explain why this is cool without going into too many technical details that I will invariably get wrong and be laughed at on the internet until the end of time. On the board here you have a microcontroller which is so much more powerful than any retro gaming system would be. The older systems were 8 or 16-bit, this is 32-bit, but all of those systems had external hardware which would generate audio and video and would set everything up in order to be sent out of the VGA port here. So the onboard chip would just take care of things like game logic. What they've done here is they've moved everything that would be in separate hardware modules on, say, the PCB of an old console like the NES, and they've moved it all into the single ARM Cortex-M0 chip that they are using. I hope I explained that both simply enough for it to make sense and without making a horrible mistake that will cause me ridicule. Now they do go a little bit into detail further down the crowd supply page about this. They just wanted to sort of prove that a Microchip board could handle VGA signal generation, which it does. But yeah, as I mentioned, this was, I think, unlaunched the last time that I talked about it. It is now launched. They have 36 days left. They've raised around about 500 euros and they have a 2,000 euro goal. If you do want to get one of the kits, they are only $30, but you can also get some peripherals like a 3D printed enclosure and of course power and data cables for it. I will leave a link to it in the description of this video, and it's definitely worth having a proper read through, something that I must admit that I did not do last time we talked about it, although that may be because it was not launched at the time. But yes, the simple VGA console is anything but simple, and getting all of this working on the microcontroller that they have is, yeah, it's pretty damn clever. Moving on to E3K, which is a hackable DIY open source biosensing kit. Now, as you've immediately seen, this uses an ESP32 development board as its base, and it has a bunch of other modules that are all designed to interface with the human body. And as you can see, alongside the ESP32, there is an EMG sensor, there is an ECG sensor, and an EEG sensor, along with an inertial measurement unit to capture any motion. So these are kind of the fundamentals of the things you need for biosensing or for interfacing with the human body. There have been some kind of very interesting things done with EEG machines and microcontrollers to do with controlling computers and creating art, but this seems to be a little bit more from just generally learning about how this human interfacing can work. So from a hardware perspective, you can see that this is very much plug and play, which is what you want if you just want to get people interested in learning it straight away. And there is some software here as well. As you can see, they have the E3K GUI, which can be programmed via Arduino IDE or the Expressive IDF. As they mentioned somewhere here as well, that they are working on putting all of this into libraries for both Arduino and Python, so you can just use this as part of your own code. So there is a lot going on here, and as always, rather than just drag you through every part of it and me reading all of it, I will let you go and read it for yourself. Needless to say, I think this is probably something that if you are interested in biohacking and biosensing is definitely worth your time. It seems a little bit more robust than some of the kind of off-the-shelf and maybe badly documented kits that you can get from various websites. I will be getting a hold of this regardless of whether it's going to be on the show or not, and that is because I am very interested in sensing your own body's stuff. I'm not someone who is particularly super healthy. I don't have a mad health regime or anything like that. It's more a case of I'm very interested in how to for example, look at your own heart rate and what you can learn from that, or maybe what you can learn from your own brain signals, partially because people in my family have a history of heart disease, and also I know people who have had traumatic brain injuries, and this kind of stuff interests me on more than just a surface level. So I will be getting a hold of one of these, and if you are interested in getting the full kit, it is $159, but you are getting a very robust ESP32 board and a bunch of, I don't know if they are actually medical grade sensors, but certainly going to be high quality sensors that are designed for both learning and research. But of course you can get all of these parts separately as well. The main unit is $39, and then you have these different sensors which are $34 each. It is still relatively early in its funding campaign, although they only have 23 days left regardless, and they are around about a quarter of the way through their goal of $4,000. Yeah, as I said, I'm a little bit more invested in this perhaps than I would be from a completely cold point of view. This goes straight past my kind of like, oh cool, fun things, to kind of like, yeah, okay, this is stuff that I'm actually interested in for personal reasons. But if you are interested in looking at it, I will leave a link to E3K in the description of this video. And to finish off this show, which we need to because as you can see the cold is finally winning up here in the Attic of Dreams, we're going to look at some projects from this week. And we're going to start this week with a persistence of vision LED staff on Instructables. Now, if you're not familiar, persistence of vision is a trick you can kind of play on yourself. Essentially, you have a set of LEDs that flash very, very quickly, and when you move them across the sky or in front of you, you can't quite process what's happening fast enough, and what you see is essentially a very brief suspended image in the sky. Now, there were a lot of toys during my childhood that used this. In the 90s, I remember being absolutely amazed by someone that had a little wand that you could type in a message and go whoomp, and yeah, this is very much an updated version of that. But of course the images explain what's going on here better than I ever could, and as you can see, when the staff is spun, these images are seemingly projected onto the air. Now of course it can look a little bit better if you use a camera with a slightly slower shutter, but having made one of these things, albeit in a much smaller form myself some years ago, you will be amazed how good it looks in a slightly darkened environment. As you can see, you can actually kind of project imagery onto it as well. It doesn't always have to be abstract shapes. So skipping to the end of the Instructable, this is the image of what you end up with. And it is essentially two clear plastic tubes, and in the middle is where you have your microcontroller and the LED strip driver board, and of course the batteries. And then there are LED strips on both sides of the staff. And there is a very, very in-depth tutorial running all the way through every single step of making this. And the design is actually pretty solid. I could see this being something you make and not have much trouble with as long as you didn't get it perhaps too wet. Although I think it looks fairly rainproof as well. In terms of what is actually inside it, as with most projects using LED strips, you can swap a few of these things out. The LED strips used here are the APA102 dot star LED strips, although I assume you could swap them out with WS8212B strips, which are of course very cheap and highly available. And the microcontroller used here is the Itsy Bitsy M4 from Adafruit. Or Adafruit, Adafruit. No, it's got to be Adafruit because it's Lady Ada, isn't it? Yeah, I've been saying Adafruit sometimes. Distractions. So yes, this is a very fast microcontroller. It is a Cortex M4, I believe, which is why it's called the M4 Express. And there are various microcontrollers that are similarly powerful to it. You could probably get away with a slightly less powerful controller depending on exactly how they're doing it, but they even say here, do not use the 32U4 or M0 Itsy Bitsies, and presumably that 32U4 also applies to Arduinos, because the 32U4 is the same chip as you find in the, let's say it together, the Arduino Mega and the Arduino Pro Mini. That said, to use anything other than the parts that Shurik179, the Instructables user that came up with this project, used, if you use anything other than the parts that they used, then you're going to have a bit of a harder time. You're going to have to port it yourself. The only reason I sort of wanted to put it out there that you could use other microcontrollers is that this would be perfect to do with a Teensy, for example, as well. But the code and everything that works with it is already designed to work exactly with what the original creator used, and there is even a user guide on GitHub which talks about how to use the stuff, and of course from there you can find the rest of the code if you want to have a look over it first. But yes, I'll leave a link to the project in the description so you can take a look at it yourself. I probably don't need to tell you this, but Stuff Made Here has exploded in popularity recently. He was already on the ascent when we talked about him last on this show, and now, yeah, his Halloween video is now number 49 on trending. It uses the same robot as his haircutting robot in order to now carve pumpkins, and as with every one of his videos, it is incredibly over-engineered, very well explained, and very funny. So I will leave a link to it in the description, and go and check it out. Moving on to the Arduino project subreddit, and a project which combines a passion for sport with a passion for DIY. And that is a project from the duct tape mechanic who has rigged up his speed bag for practicing boxing to an Arduino to count the amount of times he has hit the bag. Now, a duct tape mechanic, which incidentally, by the way, is also the name of his YouTube channel, but you can get to that by following the Reddit link that will be in the description of this video, achieved this using an Arduino and a proximity sensor, and as you can see later on in the video, it seems to be pretty good at catching the punches. You can see at the top here, it's only incrementing when it's hitting the back. Now, I don't know if you have to hit it to exactly the same spot in the back each time. I'm assuming since you use a proximity sensor, you would have to. But then again, that kind of precision is presumably part of using a speed bag. I don't know if you can tell this, but I'm not really much of a boxer. And if, like me, boxing isn't necessarily up your street, how about cricket? Howza! Moving on to a project that isn't new this week, it's just something I've came across when trying to deal with a problem I've been having. And that problem is our kitchen scales. Now, our kitchen scales use these coin cell batteries that you find in various places, typically called watch batteries as well. And I do understand that there is a place and a time for these coin cell batteries. Real-time clocks on computers, for example, need to be very compact, and they are a very compact way of sliding power into a microcontroller and leaving it to work somewhere when in deep sleep mode for quite a long time. I don't really understand why they're being put in consumer devices like kitchen scales. Surely you could just make the thing a bit thicker, but that's just me. Anyway, I instantly got to thinking, is there a way that I could just skip this battery altogether? And short of just soldering straight onto the battery connector, I thought maybe there's a way that I could slot something in there that would work like that. And lo and behold, David Watts, a fantastic YouTuber who I'm very surprised we haven't featured on the show already, has been there and done that already. So in a video put out in April this year, he talks about how he uses brass discs as a way of essentially eliminating the battery. And I use the word eliminate because battery eliminators are a thing. They have existed for some time, and they are designed exactly to do what is being done here. You put them in the place of a battery and you supply power from elsewhere. Now, the battery itself goes through the testing process for this, along with a few pitfalls you might fall into. And there's a few things that are worth considering before replacing a battery straight up with something from the mains. Batteries do give actually quite different power to mains power, depending on the kind of power adapter you are using. But the video goes into that somewhat, and there are various things on the internet that will go into, from a very high level or a very, very deep level, the difference between battery power and wall power that's been changed from AC to DC. But the video itself is fascinating, and with David's inimitable style, he goes through and explains everything very, very well in a way that I think had I not had a little bit of experience with this kind of thing in the past already, I would have still understood very easily. But yes, as I say, perhaps more amazing than the project itself is that we haven't had David on this show all that often. I've been following David for many, many years. Oh, by the way, just one thing that someone pointed out, they say, you say you follow all of these people on YouTube, but you're not subscribed to any of them. I use incognito mode for the show so that I don't get all of my random stuff and accidentally show you my bank details. My actual subscriptions are in the many, many. I have to categorize them at this stage because I follow way too many people. But yeah, David is one of the people in my maker category of YouTube that I refer to all the time, and I'm sort of amazed that we have not had his project on the show before. Maybe we should change that in the future. But as you can see, there is a good 25,000 people that already follow him already. I don't think he needs any help from me to get more subscribers. However, on the off chance you aren't familiar with David Watts, yeah, this is a fantastic and I would say essential YouTube channel for people who are fans of maker culture. Anyhow, I will leave a link to this battery eliminator video in the description. As I say so often on the show, even if you have no interest in making a battery eliminator, this is fantastic, and it has some very juicy soldering footage in it as well. And now on to a 3D printed synthesizer which uses a Raspberry Pi. This isn't just a synthesizer, this is a portable digital audio workstation. And yes, if you watch the show and you know me, you can tell that I'm already very, very excited just describing it. This is taken from a post on the Synth DIY subreddit, and the user is GrievousAngel93, incidentally also the name of their YouTube channel. And as you can see here, it's saying this is a portable DAW/synth/sampler/sequencer designed, programmed, and 3D printed by GrievousAngel93. So there's a lot to unpack here, and I'm a bit excited. Where to start? Well, the hardware side of it, you can see there's a full color LCD screen there and a 3D printed case which uses, it looks like keyboard, as in switches for keyboards, like mechanical keyboards. But inside, internally, it is using the Traction engine, which is an open source digital audio workstation, and Juice, Juice, which is a platform for creating audio effects and for creating audio in general. You can make synthesizers with it. I'd contend that behind maybe the Bella Platform's videos that they've just put out teaching you about digital signal processing, just the straight up tutorials for Juice are really good and really well worth following to learn a little bit about how you can program your own sounds. So skipping a little way on in the video, you can see here that there is essentially a little segment display showing all of the different parts that are being recorded. This is a little digital audio workstation in a tiny little screen here. There is so much that has gone into this. It is a synthesizer, it is a sampler, it processes its own effects, and it's all being done using a Raspberry Pi. This is phenomenal. I love it. Look at all the little keys. Look at the 3D printed keys with all the logos on it. Oh man, this is so cool. So as it stands, this is just a show-off project, and really what a project to show off. This is fantastic. Right now there isn't any kind of open source side to it, there isn't a GitHub, there isn't any way that you can build one of these alone, although they have said in the comments here that they are planning to, yeah, they haven't open sourced any of it yet. They may soon, once they get it cleaned up and get the CAD files a bit more polished. But oh man, this is just a lovely little piece of machinery, and the fact that it uses a Raspberry Pi as a backbone is something that appeals to me a lot. I will leave a link to this in the description. Have a quick look at it. Alright folks, that was our show for this week. Thank you so much for joining me. We're here every single week. If you do want to enter the mystery box competition, do leave a comment on the video. And as always, I'm very interested to hear what you are doing. This is a show that is based partially on projects from the community, and I would love to feature some of the stuff that you are making at home. But for now, I hope you have a safe and creative week. Take care.